both of us catch a glimpse of a little girl holding her mother's hand. But this was no child. The girl was wearing a puffy pink coat, and her black hair was long and straight. Her face was pale and skeletal. What caught our attention were her eyes, or lack of. Where her eyes should have been were empty black pits. We stand frozen in a moment, trying to grasp and rationalize what we are seeing. That instant, the girl turns her head and looks directly at us. As this happens, John and I grab each other and turn our heads as if blinded by a light. The feeling when she looked at us was as if she was truly looking through us, and it burned as she did. Hello and welcome back to Chillers and Thrillers. I am your host Em, and in this podcast I read true stories of people's encounters with the strange and unexplained. No comedy, skepticism, or gore, only 100% true spooky tales. Before we get started, I wanted to thank listener Jane Marie for her continued support of the podcast, not only through sharing her feedback and creepy stories that I've read in previous episodes, but also by supporting the podcast through Buy Me a Coffee. Thank you so much for your support, Jane Marie. Your contribution goes towards the production costs of the podcast. Also, thank you to YouTube listener Fallen Stars for all their encouraging comments on videos, and Spotify listeners JM and Danu for their comments as well. I always love hearing from listeners, and the best way to support the podcast is to interact with it by leaving comments and by leaving ratings and reviews. And if you're listening to this on YouTube and don't know what to comment, just leave me your favorite spooky icon in the comment section, and I'll be sure to reply back. A few years ago, I came across a tweet that stuck with me. It said, "One of the most frightening things I've ever heard is when someone pointed out that the existence of the uncanny valley implies that at some point there was an evolutionary reason to be afraid of something that looked human but wasn't." The uncanny valley is a term often used to describe the unsettling feeling we get when something looks almost but not quite human. The resemblance is close enough to be recognizable, but the imperfections trigger a deep sense that something is off. But what causes this reaction in the first place? What, in our ancient history, taught us to fear something that mimicked humanity without being human? Spirits, demons, angels, aliens, interdimensional beings, whatever you choose to call them, these entities don't fit neatly into our understanding of the world. And one thing's for sure, they are deeply unsettling. In this episode, I'm going to be sharing true stories of people who believed encountered something that was truly inhuman, whether it be a ghost, a demon, an interdimensional being, or who knows. And if you enjoy hearing stories like these about people who encountered other humans who were inhuman, check out other episodes of the podcast that I linked in the YouTube video. Now, let's not waste any more time. So turn down the lights, get comfortable, and listen in. Big Bear Lake, submitted by user Milky Joe 36. Around Easter of 2008, my two best friends and I went on a brocation. My friend John's family had a cabin at Big Bear that we were welcome to stay at for the weekend. It was a beautiful cabin-style home with views of the lake and forested area behind the house. We didn't spend much time in the cabin due to being young and adventurous. Our days were spent driving to the main street to eat and walk around. One of the days, around lunch, we parked a block or so from the main street. Anthony, my other friend, had to use the restroom and decided to make use of a forested area we parked next to. John and I continued to walk towards the main street. What happened next is by far the most frightening thing I have ever witnessed, and I'm a veteran. I will never forget what occurred. The main street was not crowded, but obviously busy with people going about their day. Both of us catch a glimpse of a little girl holding her mother's hand. But this was no child. The girl was wearing a puffy pink coat, and her black hair was long and straight. Her face was pale and skeletal. What caught our attention were her eyes, or lack of. Where her eyes should have been were empty black pits. We stand frozen in a moment, trying to grasp and rationalize what we are seeing. That instant, the girl turns her head and looks directly at us. As this happens, John and I grab each other and turn our heads as if blinded by a light. The feeling when she looked at us was as if she was truly looking through us, and it burned as she did. When we looked back, she was gone. On cue, Anthony returns and is uncharacteristically unsettled by our expression. We explain to him what happened and simply continue with our day, walking up and down the main street with no further signs of this girl. John and I have talked about this and told the story many times to many people. Both of us are skeptics. I still have trouble saying it's a ghost because I simply don't know what it was. But having the same paranormal experience at the same time has been hard to rationalize. Has anyone had a similar experience or have any knowledge on what it could have been? Entity lurking in my neighborhood. Submitted by Anonymous. There's some kind of entity that lurks around my childhood neighborhood. I hadn't thought about it in years, until something recently happened to our neighbors. I have no idea what this thing is, and I'd be grateful if anyone else had an idea of what it could be. The first time I can remember it, I was a kid, on Christmas Eve. The rest of my family had gone to midnight mass, except for my mom's cousin and me. He just didn't feel like going, and my mom wanted me to go to bed, so he stayed home with me. At some point, after they left, I woke up and I couldn't get back to sleep because I was so excited for Santa to come. I got up to look for my cousin. I checked the house but couldn't find him, until I looked out the window and saw him outside, shoveling snow and salting the walkway. I put on my boots and went outside, telling him I didn't want to sleep. He laughed and told me to give him a second. He was just trying to make sure my grandma wouldn't slip when she got home. So while he worked, I stood outside with him, and he told me stories about the Christmases from before I was born, including one where he told me about one where my uncle was trying to straighten up a star on the Christmas tree during the Christmas party and fell, taking the whole tree down with him. We were laughing and having a good time until something strange happened. We saw her, a woman, wearing a really eccentric outfit. A long black veil that almost looked like a tablecloth, and a long black dress. She didn't have on a coat either, which I found odd. I assumed she was dressed up for Mass. My cousin said Merry Christmas to her as she walked by us. She nodded, but didn't say anything back. I watched her walk straight up the sidewalk and disappear into the night. Other than her strange outfit and the eerie feeling we got from her, nothing too strange, right? Except when my cousin turned to sweep where she had just walked. He froze. There were no footprints. At first, he just stared. Then he turned to me and asked, "She walked through here, right?" I nodded. He kept staring at the untouched snow, trying to make sense of it, saying, "Maybe she walked in the street?" But there was snow there too, and no footprints. He sent me inside while he walked up the road to see where she went, but there was nothing. No footprints anywhere, no marks from her, no sign of her. Nothing to indicate anyone actually walked through there. When my family got back from Mass, my cousin told them about what we saw. He was clearly shaken, but no one had an explanation. My grandma insisted that we were mistaken about where she had walked, and we couldn't have been because she walked right past us. We saw her go up the street a little bit. Additionally, by the time my family had gotten home, other people had come back from midnight Mass and left footprints and tire prints, so we couldn't emphasize enough to them how strange it truly was. Eventually, it just became one of those weird things that happened. A few years ago, my older sister was in college and home for Thanksgiving. She was staying up late, working on a paper in the computer room. My mom and dad were in the kitchen, still prepping things for Thanksgiving, and I was asleep. Suddenly, I woke up from the sound of my sister running from the back room to the kitchen, completely panicked. She told us she had been working when she suddenly felt like someone was sitting next to her, watching her. When she turned to look, she saw an older woman, plain as day, sitting right beside her. There was no chair there or no place to sit, so she was really weirded out by the fact she was eye level with this woman. The woman smiled at her, and then she turned to look at the computer screen. She looked back at my sister, and then when my sister got up to leave and started running, she turned around and saw the woman was in the middle of the room. My dad checked the whole house. He made sure all the doors and windows were locked. When he went back to the front window to check if they were locked, he called for my mom. My nosy self came running too. He pointed outside and said, "Do you see that?" A human-like shadow was floating, not walking, floating, up the same stretch of road where my cousin and I had been when we saw the woman years before. I got a horrible sense of dread and terror, but my family tries to explain it away. My dad said that my sister had been staring at the computer screen for hours, and her eyes were probably tired and not focusing properly on things. Or that maybe she had fallen asleep at the desk and it was all a bad dream. My grandma said the shadow was just a shadow, and they went on finishing preparing for Thanksgiving and wouldn't talk about it anymore. Years passed, and I never thought much about it again, until a few months ago. My dad called me and said his roof was leaking. He needed help patching it up, so my husband went over to lend a hand. They had to run to the Home Depot for supplies, and when they got back, they saw the short-term renters from the house across the street standing outside. The renters asked if my parents had security cameras, because something had happened the night before, and they were terrified. The husband had gone to bed, but the wife had stayed up watching TV. She suddenly got the feeling that someone was standing next to her. When she turned, there was an old woman sitting on the couch, staring at her. The wife screamed and ran from the room, waking up the husband. He searched the house, but found nothing, except for a few unlocked windows that were way too high for someone to climb in through. And he also thought that there might be impressions in the mud if someone had jumped out of the window to get out. My dad was shaken, but he didn't tell us why. He checked the footage from his Ring cameras. The only thing they captured around that time of night was a single car passing by and nothing else. The renters contacted the owners of the house, who told them their cameras only pointed at the key box and part of the carport, and they hadn't seen anything unusual. My dad explained the whole history of seeing this entity to my husband, who suggested we ask other neighbors about it, but my parents don't want anyone thinking that they're crazy. I don't have any explanation, but I'm wondering, who or what is she, and why does she keep appearing? We had always thought she was attached to us or the house in some way because of a family tragedy that happened in the house, but apparently not if she's appearing in other homes in the area. I also think it's interesting that she appears around the same time of the year. This last time she was spotted happened around early to mid-November. My sister saw her in late November, and we saw her Christmas Eve. She tends to appear around celebratory occasions or other happy events. We've seen her during holidays, and I think the renters across the street were on a trip, having a delayed honeymoon or something similar. No-faced people. Submitted by user Quick Detective 1922. I live in Minnesota, and I have seen 2 faceless people in the last year and a half. Here are my sightings. Story 1, The Faceless Woman. This happened while I was working at an old folks' home in Milaca, Minnesota. I was inside in the bathroom when my coworker, an ex-Marine who was not easily scared, came running in from outside. She had been heading to her truck when something terrified her. She burst inside, yelling things I couldn't make out at first, but I could tell she was panicked. I rushed out of the bathroom and saw her completely shaken. She kept repeating, I've seen a person with black, and then while waving her hand over her face from her forehead to her chin, kept repeatedly saying, no face, all black. She said she saw someone at her truck. The figure had a black hood up, and where the face should have been, there was nothing. Just a black void. She said it wasn't like seeing a face hidden. It was like there was no face at all. She ran to the nearest window to take a look at her truck and started screaming my name, telling me to come take a look. When I got to the window, I saw the figure she had described. It was standing there, looking at the ground, and I saw it with my own eyes. Then, suddenly, it looked up at us and immediately dashed across the street to the building across from ours. We've since started calling it the girl in the pink hoodie. My coworker ran out the door after it. I followed, yelling at her to come back in because I didn't want to find out what that thing was. She refused, kept walking, and then quietly said, "Come here right now." So now we're both outside near this thing, and what I saw next is something I will never forget. This woman in the pink hoodie was hunched over, with her arms hanging down towards the ground, like a drug addict looking for something. But she was completely still. And that's what made it even creepier. She had just sprinted across the street seconds earlier, but now she wasn't moving. Not a muscle, not a breath. Her arms were stretched out towards the ground, her torso hunched, and her head pointed straight down, like a statue. No breathing, no swaying, no shifting. I couldn't take it. I ran back inside. And that was the end of that encounter. My second encounter I called the cemetery figure. This was in Omania, Minnesota, at the Woodland Cemetery. I was driving up to Brainerd for work and passing the casino near Mille Lacs Lake. Something told me to look left. I never do, and honestly, I didn't even know there was a cemetery across the casino. But when I looked, I saw him. There was a man at the entrance of the cemetery. He wore a gray and black hoodie, black gloves, black pants, black shoes, and his hood was up. But where his face should have been, there was nothing. A black, empty void. He was pacing back and forth at the gate. As I passed, he looked straight at me, then just continued pacing like nothing happened. I didn't turn around, I didn't look back, I just kept driving. I try to brush it off, but I still wonder, has anyone else seen anything like this in that area or anywhere nearby? Summer of 2011. Submitted by user Prince of Dubai. This happened back in August of 2011 in the greater Los Angeles area. During my first year of high school, I was going through some rough times. I was extremely hostile and rebellious, and I greatly worried my parents. There were a few instances where they almost wanted to call the police on me due to my impulsive and negative behavior. And here's the story. I just ended my first year of high school. I used to sleep with the door open back in the day, until this happened. I randomly woke up one morning around 1:30. I stayed awake looking at the ceiling, wondering if I should just go back to sleep or play some video games. While I was deciding what to do, I heard faint footsteps. At first, I was thinking that it was just in my head, or was the sound of creaking wood. I heard the footsteps again, but this time they grew louder and sounded like someone was walking straight to my room. But again, I played it off as a creaking wood. After a while, I noticed something in my peripheral vision. I could see a shadow or an object standing in my doorway. I knew something was right there because I could not directly see my brother's room, which is a few feet from mine. Something was blocking my entrance. I glanced and saw that the shadow looked humanoid or in the form of a person. I assumed it was maybe my parents checking in on us like they used to back in the day. Minutes passed, and I saw that the shadow would not move or go away. I got curious to see who was blocking my doorway, and slowly, the shadow started coming into the light. It was an extremely tall and abnormally thin humanoid, about 7 to 8 feet tall. It was faceless, hairless, bald, and had a fair skin complexion with visible veins under its faceless skin. The entity was dressed old-fashioned like a grandpa would. It had a cream-colored sweater with what appeared to be random paint strokes and splashes on it of many colors and black slacks. It was just standing there as if it was looking at me. I thought I was dreaming. I started blinking and shaking my head, and even slapped myself in hopes that when I opened my eyes, it would disappear, and I would dismiss it as a nightmare or possible hallucination. After my final attempt to wake up, I stopped and looked. It was still standing there. I leaned up from my bed to get a closer look at this thing and saw it had freakishly long arms way past the knee that fell onto the floor. That's when I immediately freaked out and pulled the covers over my face. I tried yelling for help and I couldn't scream at all from the terror. About 30 minutes later, I built up some courage and pulled the covers off, and to my surprise, it was gone. After the encounter, I ran to my parents' room to tell them what I had seen earlier. Later, after sunrise and during breakfast, I was about to tell my mom about a crazy dream I had. She immediately interrupted me, saying I had gone into her room very early in the morning, petrified and frightened, and talking about a tall man I had seen. And that's when I realized that I wasn't dreaming at all, that this had truly happened. Strangely enough, after encountering this entity, my mother said that I changed drastically for the better. I haven't seen it since, but a few years later, my youngest brother also saw the same thing, kneeling before him, wearing an old-fashioned suit, and staring down at him. I Know You're in There. Submitted by Anonymous. At this fundamentalist church I grew up in, there were always lots of transient people coming in and out. It definitely attracted a weird crowd. So this one lady started coming to the church one day, and she'd probably been going for about 3 weeks. I'd gotten a weird vibe from her from the start. She had a delay in her speech and a vacant look in her eyes. And she never really talked to the other churchgoers, but she didn't do anything outwardly that would cause much concern. I noticed that during the sermons, though, she would move her head around in a jerky motion. I kind of got freaked out and started wondering if she was possessed by something. The following week, as the sermon concluded and the worship music started, everyone was standing in one place, singing and clapping. I was maybe 10 pews back from her, looking at the back of her head. And I mouthed, barely audibly, "I know you're in there." At that moment, her head turned and looked me straight in the eyes. A huge, sinister grin came across her face. She stared back for about 10 to 15 seconds, but it felt like eternity. Then she slowly turned her head back to the center. After this, she basically stopped going. I only saw her briefly 1 or 2 more times, and I never caught her name. The road trip, submitted by user Kitchen Sink Singer. When I was in college around the year 2000, me and 2 of my girlfriends who I worked with at a coffee shop in Omaha decided to drive to San Francisco for vacation. We were really excited for this road trip. In the middle of the 8-hour drive through Nebraska, I convinced them to take a side trip. It's a 2-hour detour off of the I-80. We were having a blast, but the day was getting late and it got very dark on the highway back to San Francisco. We were trying to make it to Cheyenne that night, and there were no lights on the road except my headlights. It was so dark, it was just black past the headlights. We couldn't see anything. My best friend Anne was reclined in the passenger seat, falling asleep, and our friend Kate was lying down in the back seat, already asleep. All of a sudden, I see this super tall man out of nowhere on the side of a 2-lane highway. I screamed loudly and said, "What the hell is he doing there?" Anne and Kate both shot up and saw the man too and started freaking out. He was about 8 feet tall, holding his thumb out with a suitcase in the other hand, and wearing a super long duster jacket and a fedora. He was gray but very real. He looked like a person. I couldn't see his feet. His shape just ended at the bottom of the duster jacket. Our hearts were racing so much. We talked about it all the way to Cheyenne that night. Why was that man out there like that at the middle of nowhere? We didn't talk about that man again until about a year later. One night we were hanging out and one of us said, "Remember that guy hitchhiking on the side of the road?" Then, at the same time, we both exclaimed, "I don't think he was real." Me either. And we both slowly realized over the past year that that man was definitely not human. The Walmart Encountered, submitted by user TinglyTX Girl. This encounter occurred when I was working as a cashier at Walmart. I was the only one working at the register as it was late at night. I had a line full of people and one supervisor close by doing her thing. I looked up and saw this guy about 2 or 3 people behind my current customer, and he gave me an instant feeling of unease. I saw this black fog type aura around him. I've never seen auras or any type of things prior to this. I kept watching him out of the corner of my eye, and I could feel him watching me. When I looked up again to take care of my customer, it was this weird guy instead. Even stranger was, no one else was in line anymore, and I could no longer find my supervisor. The store was quiet. All I remember about this guy is he had longish brown hair, average height and looks, and the strangest blue eyes I've ever seen. I looked at him to ask what I could do for him, and before the words even completely left my mouth, he stated he needed a specific brand of cigarettes. The whole time, he had this knowing grin on his face. When I turned around from him to get his cigarettes, everything went black. I couldn't see anything for what seemed like several minutes, but I'm sure was only a few seconds at best. All I could think was, oh God, this man is in my head and has completely messed my mind. When I finally turned back to him, he just laughed this weird laugh, like he knew what I was thinking. He looked at me again and just walked away. As soon as he was gone, everything went back to normal. My supervisor was back, I had a line full of customers again, all of it. I felt off for several days after this encounter and had nightmares about this guy's eyes following me and telling me he was watching me. The party. Submitted by user must be Thursday. A little over 20 years ago, my friend and I went to a 4th of July party at the house of a guy they went to high school with. It started out pretty chill, but as the night went on, it ended up being the kind of party I didn't think actually existed outside of an 80s teen movie. Huge house in a rich neighborhood, no regard for property damage. Picture the party at the end of Weird Science, but subtract the mutant bikers and add a couple hundred kids in their teens and early 20s. At some point, these two guys showed up. Nobody knew who they were. They spoke to no one, not even each other. They didn't eat anything. They didn't drink anything. They didn't try to interact with anyone at all that I saw. What they did do was freak everyone out. Visually, they were exactly average. Average height, average looks, average build, ambiguous age, ambiguous ethnicity. 100% forgettable. Except they absolutely radiated darkness and hostility. They would just stand on opposite sides of a room and glare angrily at each other for a while, then walk into a different room to glare angrily at each other again. They seemed to communicate with each other like that. It was creepy as hell. It was like there was some kind of evil force inside of them that was barely contained by their skin. If they walked into a room where you were, it felt like the air itself suddenly became oppressive. At some point, my friends and I dipped out to go check out another party up in the mountains, and a couple people we knew took off to a different party in a town in the opposite direction of where we were going, about 30 miles away from the original party. Halfway to our destination, we stopped at a gas station to get smokes and a drink. When we walked out, those guys were there. They were standing outside of their car, perfectly still, just staring holes through us. I don't know if I've ever felt that creeped out. We all piled into our car in record time and peeled out of that parking lot. Thankfully, it didn't look like they tried to follow us, and we never saw them again. A few hours later, we went back to our first party to find a girl we knew sitting on the floor holding a baseball bat, jumpy as hell, ready to swing at anything that looked threatening. Apparently, those guys got way creepier after we left. Nobody would go into any details, so I never found out exactly what happened, but everyone who had stayed at the first party looked thoroughly shook. The next day, I ran into one of the people that took off to the other party, and right about the same time we had our gas station encounter with the spooky twins, they had the exact same encounter with the same guys at a gas station probably 50 miles away from where we were. Meanwhile, the people who stayed at the party swear they didn't leave the party until hours after we saw them at the gas station. It was all intensely freaky. I don't know who those guys were or what they wanted, but I have genuine doubts as to whether they were really human. The Trickster. Submitted by user Wester Fluff. Years ago, I used to work at a nature facility that was around 500 acres with a few miles of walking trails. One day, I had a lady come into the office and tell me there was a dead armadillo in the middle of one of the trails. I went to clean it up, and it had a single bite to its underbelly. The next day, I was walking the trails, and I came across another armadillo. Same thing, a single bite to the underbelly. This went on for 14 days. Every day, I had to remove an armadillo. Number 13 was on a trail on the backside of the park. While I was cleaning up the armadillo, an old man, looking to be in his late 70s with sun-weathered skin, walked up to me, and he was wearing a Western-style shirt. He said, "He's just messing with you." I said, "What are you talking about?" And the man said, "The Trickster." I said, "What now?" The man said to me, "The coyote, he's just messing with you. He thinks it's funny how mad you get." And I said, "Well, I wish he'd stop." The old man just chuckled and started walking off. I told him to have a good day. He waved while walking off and said, "You too," turning the bend in the trail. I tossed the armadillo into the brush, and I was less than 10 seconds behind the old man. I turned the bend. He was gone. I looked all over for him. I walked the trails for hours, asking everyone I saw if they had seen him. No one had. The next day, when I got to work, I went into the office to check my emails. I opened the window blinds, and there was an armadillo with one bite in its underbelly laying under my window. That was the last one, number 14. I sat there thinking, and the old man's shirt had geometric coyotes in a desert. And I'm pretty sure the old man was the trickster. And that's all for this episode. So, what are your thoughts? Have you ever encountered somebody that triggered your sixth sense, that made you feel unsettled, and almost like they weren't human? You know I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can share them with me via email at chillersandthrillers@gmail.com or leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify. We have 2 episodes left in Season 4. There's some great stories that I'm excited to be sharing with you guys. But in the meantime, I hope all you ghouls and ghosts stay safe, and I'll see you soon.